Hi. Hello everyone. Right. Design rose number 3. Tonight, Marcela Orspina, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, she's coming from a great background. She's gonna go through that herself. She's gonna talk to you tonight about diversity and in creative teams and how we bringing people together or how we exploring our working environment. There are plenty of things that we can talk about Marcela, but Marcela definitely she will she will go through these things. So I don't want to repeat. Marcela, thank you very much for coming, and Josh, yeah. So yours.
Cool. Hey guys. Thank you, Anastasia, for having me. Um, my name is Marcela Orspina. I'm a service designer at a global consulting firm called Designet. And today I'm going to talk about how diversity influences creativity. And I'm going to go through some of my work that illustrates that, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. This is my Twitter, so it's at Marcela_Ospina if you want to tweet. Or if you're on Instagram, I don't have it there, but if you type my name, you should find me. And there's also my website. So have fun, guys. So I figured when I was thinking about this talk, and because diversity was the topic, I figured I should start with myself because of my background. So I grew up in Colombia, but I lived for the last 13 years in South Africa. And I have done work in 10 countries. I currently have 3 homes. And in my spare time, I DJ techno. So why do I start there? Because I feel like in this presentation, I'm going to diverge quite a lot to then converge. And I would like to start giving you like a brief overview of my journey and how I got to service design, which is also quite diverse. So I was trained as an anthropologist in Colombia. And in my path, I diverged and converged quite a lot. My first job was in advertising. And I ended up there because of people and people I knew and conversations I had and mentors. But it wasn't a linear path. It kind of went back and forth. And then I did a little bit of digital strategy for a while. And then because the discipline of design is been changing over time, the names given to things and jobs have also changed. So from digital strategy, they started calling market research, they started calling it user research as well. And as I got more into design, I ended up in service design. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term, but basically in industry, it compiles strategy and research. And it's a role, it's fairly new. And it's pretty common in digital agencies, in design agencies, strategic design agencies, and consulting firms. That's just to give you a little bit of background. Why do I emphasize on diverging and converging? Because it is the source of creativity. Today I was listening to a podcast, and the question that opened up the podcast was about creativity and how to nurture it. And it was by the TED Talks organizers. And it left me thinking on, can you really nurture creativity? Is it something that you can learn, or is it something you can train over time? And I feel like the answer lies in this exercise of converging and diverging. Converging meaning quantity and meaning building up on ideas and concepts, with brainstorming being the main technique for that. And diverging meaning narrowing down the angle. And I feel that when talking about creativity, we're talking about exercising both. And this leads into a way of thinking. And that way of thinking is abductive logic. So if you think, for instance, of what is taught in business schools or what is taught in conventional schools, you learn to understand facts as logical. And A, therefore B, therefore C. However, as designers, we're trained to think about possibilities and what things could be. And in short, we're taught to think about what we can do with our imagination. And I think that's the space I want to work with you guys tonight, to think about creativity as an act that can be nurtured and as something that can be trained, with the exercise of converging and diverging. But obviously, this is not an individualistic exercise, and that's what my experience has led me to believe, and apparently also current literature on the topic. Creativity is built upon different perspectives, which is why collaboration is key. I'll give you some examples. In terms of technology, there are two trends in managing, and they're called agile and lean. And both of them defend teamwork and collaboration as the main component of successful work and effective teams. And this has the roots in that if you work well together, you can be more effective. Now, Google had a project last year called Aristotle. And in that project, they were finding out why some of their teams were more effective than others and how come they worked. And they wanted to understand some of their rules. So they went out and did a psychological study. And they found that the most effective teams were diverse and were teams that listened to every single person's opinions. So in those teams, everybody was listened at or to. And also, in the same teams, there were more perspectives coming from because of the fact that people felt safe when they spoke. And I feel like that's a very good definition of diversity as I understand it. And it's also a very good definition of creativity as building upon each other's perspectives. I had the opportunity last year of going to a school called Hyper Island. And Hyper Island, I learned experience design. And this was one of my teams. And as you can see, it was pretty diverse. But in my experience whilst there, I was part of 4 teams like that, and 4 different briefs, answering 4 different briefs. And there were 9 nationalities in my teams and 7 different disciplines. And what I learned from being from team to team, which at the beginning seemed quite tedious and something I really didn't want to do because it takes you time to get used to other people. And then I just found it so overwhelming that as I was getting used to them, I had to change. And what it taught me towards the end is that in me changing position from team to team, I also learned different things about myself. And I also took different positions in every single team. And so not only I learned from different perspectives from mine, because in every single team we had different disciplines, I also learned different things about myself and my own position. And for that, I think that was what I gained from the whole experience. It wasn't so much about the contents of what I learned, but about how to think differently about problems in contexts that are diverse. So academic research sort of backs it up. And I looked up a little bit on this, and it says basically in psychological research that multicultural experiences, not necessarily multicultural people, but having been exposed to multicultural experiences broaden people's perspectives and the capacity of thinking differently about problems. I firmly believe this because I lived it, and I still live it in my day-to-day. So I would like to now kind of take all the stuff that I've been saying, which, I don't know, it sounds like theory, and make it into something more concrete. And I would like to show you my working life, how diversity has played a role, but more importantly, how diversity leads to creativity in the sense that I've been explaining. I'm going to go through one example from Hyper Island, which is my thesis, which I finished in November. And then I'm going to go through examples of my work at Design It, and then some of my South African work. The first one is my thesis. So there is Josh. Josh was in my team together with an Australian guy and someone from Sweden. We all came from different academic backgrounds as well. And in my thesis, I had to be immersed in practice, so I had to be working somewhere. So at the same time that I was working, I was also analyzing, and I was also doing my field work. And my thesis consisted in understanding what happens to creativity when design firms are acquired by businesses, which is a trend in industry. A lot of very big, large corporations are acquiring design firms because of value and because it gives them like a differential in regards to their competitors. And I was very interested in what happens when that business transition occurs and then the impact that that has on people. And I did a lot of multiple experiments with them, one of them being an experience map of their highs and their lows. So I asked them to map out a day in their lives and what happened in that day. And then I would give them tasks throughout the day, and they would map out how their creativity peaked or how their motivation levels peaked high and low. And then we would have a conversation about it. And then I would give them exercises to overcome their lows, and then they would do the exercises, and then they would come back to me and map out their experience again. And I did this systematically with 3 people for over a week or 2. And then I did it with my colleagues at work. It was pretty diverse in that my sample was in South Africa, the UK, and the States. And also because everybody had different backgrounds, although mostly they worked in the creative industry. And what is interesting about the conclusions is not necessarily that I could prove that people are more creative or not after given certain tasks, because after all, it's quite difficult. For instance, sometimes people were less creative just purely because of environment, and it's too noisy outside, and they had to go and change where they're sitting. But what was really interesting was that as they reflected on their days, and as they sort of realized an awareness of their own experiences, they also started understanding that they could control the experience and that they could change it. And to me, this is really important, this realization and this self-awareness. And it really ties in with everything else that I've been saying about working in teams. Because when you are self-aware in a team, you can also go back and share your own ideas and have your own goals and say, okay, I'm low. You have an awareness of how low you are. But you can also start putting in practice some activities to overcome that. So I think that was the main realization with my thesis. And maybe it is far-fetched, but I think one could even say that systematic training and systematic self-awareness can lead into increased creativity in a diverse environment. The second example, it is something I did recently for a client. And in this case, the client didn't know what they wanted. And this is sort of our strategy, sort of our future vision. And basically, the client wanted us to come up with a way to help them work better as teams. And their teams were located all over the place, Africa, Australia, you name it, the States, here. And basically, teams were just dispersed and they weren't working well together. And we started identifying pain points, with the main one being that they never knew what people were up to, and there wasn't like a sense of being in the same team. And then we just started thinking about current technologies and things that we could incorporate these to. And I mean, of course, there are lots of things nowadays for teams. There's Slack, there's Trello. I mean, there's tons of things. So we felt like we didn't need to go and recreate the wheel. But we started thinking about the strategies to put maybe a piece of technology in the center that was cloud-based, but with the goal of making teams tighter. And even though this brief didn't address creativity specifically, it does address the common point throughout the presentation of people wanting to collaborate and people wanting to work together, and diverse teams needing to work together for better results. And I think if any of you is going to work in industry, it's kind of important that you take this out with you, because at least in design, everything is done in teams, and very little work is done individually. And yeah, I think it is an important realization. My next case study was in Nigeria, and there I did work for a mobile payment company, and they were looking at launching a product for paying with your cell phone. And basically, that was interesting because my sample was quite varied. I had to go and investigate users across the small, medium businesses, and then also young people and students, and then young professionals. And then so all users were different. But as I was putting together the case study, I realized the most important part of the example and the case study is not how diverse my sample was, but how diverse was I in regards to them, and how I was the person who was a foreigner, and how that position, me being an outsider, made me more creative, because I had to think of different ways of speaking to them, of getting hold of them, because nothing was given to me. My client didn't give me the users. I had to go and find them. And with that realization, I understood that it's a different way of looking at diversity, that it's not always a me to them, that sometimes you are the other, and that in that otherness, you start becoming more creative. And with that, there's also a term in user research, which is called personas, which describes sets of users as per behaviors. And basically what it does is that it segments different users per, let's say, what they like, or what their lifestyle is like, or how they behave in regards to technology. And I feel like it is very common to want to design for one size fits all because it's easier, and because sometimes it does make sense, because you don't want to go and recreate a Slack for every single type of user. However, it's really important to understand that the creativity lies in understanding difference, and that for us and for you guys, for me, for all of us who design, the importance of the practice is to think about those differences and to design around them. And again, diversity and creativity play a huge role in doing that properly. My last case study I did in South Africa, and I was working at a management consulting firm and for a very large corporation. And it was quite a complex brief because they had 6 different segments of users and 2 different streams. The one was inside the company, and the other one was just exclusively for users. And in answering this brief, we needed to improve the customer experience across multiple channels: digital, mobile, and call centers, and also face-to-face. And then in thinking about the work, we had to come up with a concept. Again, we were in a team with 5 different disciplines and 5 different countries. And I had never really worked closely with engineers. And I had really never worked closely with many people, really. And what it taught me was like how ideas can be built upon, but also how the best concepts come from the intersection. So for instance, in this case, we mashed technology with a human need and a human insight with the UX. And then we came up with a goal-setting dashboard for the client. And again, I feel like the important part is in the process that leads you to work together well with your colleagues in a way that leads to creative results. Not necessarily because you know what the solution is going to be, but also because you're working well together as a team. And then that leads me to show you a little bit of our thinking in terms of industry. So this is sort of like a model that we use depending on the brief. But basically, you will have a business layer of design that taps into what the client wants and taps into your brief on what the client asks you to do. And that may be something that the users don't want, and that may be something you don't quite understand, but that's your point of departure. And then you have service design, which is tiny, sort of a long-term vision of your client and what your client wants, and your user. And then eventually you have the layer of visual design and UX and the other kind of design. And then you have phases, a phase of research, a phase of co-creating with the users, and a phase of designing. And then all the other things that go around, whether it's product, brand, etc. And I think it is important to understand that picture because it kind of collates a lot of the things I've been saying. So it is important to work well with your colleagues because it's multidisciplinary. But it is also important to take a brief and dissect it and understand it from a business perspective and to look at what your client really wants from you and how can you provide the best answer in a context that is very diverse and in a context where creativity is valued, but creativity with an argument. If you want to call it, this is outrageous, but sort of a strategic creativity. So it has to have an end. It's not the type of thing that you woke up and you had an idea. And again, it is a process. So because I think and I believe that design is the outcome of reflecting on the practice itself, and I feel that good ideas and good concepts and creativity itself emerges from that act of reflection. And this is my reflection of my practice. So this is an image from Burning Man, and it is something I want to do before I die. I haven't done it. And I feel like diversity to me is having enough experiences to draw from when I'm creating. And what I mean by that is that I'm the outcome of those experiences, and it translates into my ideas and my concepts. I think being exposed to a lot of contrast also stimulates creativity because when you go into a place and you're a complete foreigner, you can only feel so small and so different. And then the embodiment of differences, and it's really just learning to appreciate situations in which you can design because they are different and because you're designing for difference. So if you had to take something away from this presentation, I think this would be it. The first one is that being a foreign to situations exhibits diversity and prompts creativity. So I would advise you to put yourselves in situations that are not, that are out of your comfort zone. It is important to be aware of the tensions when designing for different kinds of people because your worldview is only yours. And so it is important that you don't think that everybody's like you or your group of friends because more often than not, it's not the case. And then diversity extends with the most obvious one is being self-aware that you're not the user, that you're you, and that, I mean, yeah, you can do co-creation and you can try and be like the user, but it is important to have that level of awareness. And then at last is that team is everything, and that when you're doing this kind of work, your ideas are only your ideas, but it's only gonna increase your divergence and increase your creativity when you work well with other disciplines and with other people. And with that, I wanna leave you for questions. Thank you.
So any questions for Marcela? Please sit down.
Thank you.
I have a couple of them to start maybe. That was great. Thanks.
Thank you.
For For me, it's very relevant because my research background is in participatory design. So I strongly believe that the teamwork is great skill to have. So you said like team is everything.
At the moment,
At the
in my
moment.
life at
So
least.
that's the thing. I want to talk to you a bit about like this kind of individuality. Like the millennia, young people especially, they're going through a very kind of close into their cell era, where they don't, they're afraid to speak to each other. They don't have the skills that we have maybe in our generation. So where you think is going? How that will affect the design thinking and process?
With millennials being individualistic.
Yeah, behind the screen and behind the phone, behind the screen in general.
I think I question if that's true, if they are really individualistic. As a matter of fact, last year I had a brief in understanding why, what could make them donate towards charities. And then I had to understand what they were about. And actually, the literature differed because even though a lot of the literature was like they narcissistic and all they think about is themselves, there was also a huge body of literature saying it's just that they're very discontent with a lot of things. And there is a sense of community and it's really strong. It's just different from ours. So, but regardless, I feel like it's not so much about them and who they are and how individualistic they are, but about how creativity in itself and the view of creativity is changing. And creativity is no longer seen as this one thing that one day you woke up and you had a good idea. Because you may have 10,000 good ideas, but who's going to pay for that? Like companies don't invest millions in that. Companies want facts and they want things that are more like substantial and solid, at least in my line of work. And I feel like it is that sort of change in the mindset of like, it's not about being super talented and one day I'm going to become the next, Beyonce. But it is also about like, it builds up throughout time, I think.
Any questions from the crowd? Or just keep asking questions, so go for it. I will keep asking.
Or I would be interested in hearing from you guys because you are the target. How do you see yourselves in terms of individualism and community? Because I definitely think there is a sense of a community is different.
I know you want to say something.
I don't know, off the top of my head, I guess. It feels like there's definitely a community, but there's still a sense of, like, how would you say it? Like, you think of yourself as a community in itself, and then you combine with other people within that. But I don't know, I'm kind of looking from the inside out perspective, what you're looking at, so maybe I'm hitting the wrong angle, I don't know. Did that make sense?
Yes, maybe.
I don't know.
Anyone else?
Well, I'm in the middle of the group. I'm
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in between. I'm 36, so I feel it's really interesting to study with them, because then you see no, because you see different things and you go back and you say, well, I wasn't like that. I mean, they act different. Something is different. And then when I'm acting like myself and sometimes go and being 20 again with them, it's kind of something that I do. They don't really.
Yeah.
They don't
It's
really agree with it or don't accept it or don't understand why.
I think we identify as individuals rather than a community. So if you were to think of define yourself, we wouldn't define ourselves as, oh, I am this group of people. We'd define ourselves as I am this, my individual self. But again, what you're saying about that we are still part of community, we still try and adhere to and join to and create a community within ourselves for whatever that might be, that we find links in.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
It's a huge subject. The reason of having the diversity and inclusivity in design roles this year, every year we have a different theme. is just because this is shifting a lot nowadays,
Mm.
and maybe what's happening now in such in the political sphere or the social sphere. You're an anthropologist, so you will know more about it actually. So I'm not going to interfere with your.
No, no, no.
So it's changing, and I was really surprised the other day to see it was an article about Trump and how design will change in the States in the next 4 years while he's president. He's going to be president, so it's already changing.
Oh, wow.
So what do you think about that? How do you think that design is changing because of things that are happening, like Trump is an example, Brexit is another one, hundreds of others around the world?
I think it makes sense because it's contestatory. I think it can be seen as a reaction, no? As something people do to contest something they dislike or something that they against, or maybe because he will suppress a lot of things because he's so right-wing, and then what are people going to do in reaction to that? Because it can go either way. It can become really subversive, but it can also go the other way, like it becomes dull and boring. So yeah, definitely social trends and culture influence everything. What I've seen, at least in an industry that's like with all these businesses being acquired by big companies, they do change the nature of design businesses, and they do become much less about the output and making things beautiful and, I don't know, the art, and they become much more about outputs and KPIs and processes, and it's quite like one really has to find a place to fight it, because otherwise the actual work it's really not that creative. So there is that tension. It's a tension. It's a tension, and I think it exists, but it's always going to exist. So, you know.
Do you think that currently the most of the students working on different projects related to this kind of concerns, issues, do you think that social media and the idea of the fake news, for example, affect this process, affect the way we think? It's changed. Like we're talking about people that may not have a specific knowledge on politics or social impact or service design. Do you think that the social media help or affect, I'm not saying that's help, the design thinking, limiting it?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think everything affects everything, but that's kind of vague. I feel like social media is biased because what we are shown is algorithmic, is biased. It's not the full spectrum. So from that perspective, of course, it biases the information we receive as much as it biases what we're influenced by. And again, going back to divergence and convergence, it does narrow down. It converges too quickly sometimes. Sometimes for creativity and for design, it should be better to diverge and diverge and diverge and diverge. But I often wonder how many things I'm not shown by social media. I mean, I'm always shown news about the same amount of people. And like, I often wonder what agenda do they have, and like, it starts becoming really creepy. And like, and I think if you don't take a distance from it, like, and you take it for real, you're only getting a very limited version of reality. So it's quite dangerous.
Yeah. So how, like, I will go back. Any guys, anything to ask? Okay. Do you want, please? Who's that? Yeah.
Integration, as in how you integrate with people that you work with in other countries, because obviously there must be that communication gap.
I will repeat that in case like that. The question is like how you're integrating the team in your environment, working environment. Because obviously culture plays an important role. London is the city with multicultural background. 54% of the citizens in London are coming from outside London. So how do you work? Is that the question? How do you manage working with various cultures. You already been mentioning up there that you've been working in various projects and various.
Yeah, of course. Look, in a place like Nigeria, which is really foreign and really different, I wouldn't say there is such a thing as integration. I don't think there can be. It's not integration. You're still pretty much an observer. And how did I do it and how did I overcome it is by getting locals to help me get in touch with the local people. And those locals are called fixers. They're like intermediaries, like hooking people up with other people to speak. So I wouldn't talk about integration. Here it's slightly different because at the end of the day, I have been in South Africa for a very long time and it's kind of Anglo-speaking, etc. But I often wonder if I came straight from Colombia, if that would be the case. And I don't have an answer, but I suspect it would be different. So I think there's always that as a challenge. I don't know if one really ever integrates fully, in my view.
Like, get like complications because obviously you're moving from one environment to the next environment. Obviously it must be exciting, but at the same time, you know, the kind of information that you're always, you know, dealing with, it must kind of get irritating sometimes. So do you get
The transition you mean from one place to the other, or
yeah, because she said that she worked
Yeah,
in certain places, innit?
yeah.
So different countries. So I'm thinking you must have had like negative like input in the sense of being in a country where you might not understand certain things.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, look, in general, doing field work in Africa was really challenging because it was so different, and South Africa's not it doesn't really count. But like there was one time I went to Angola, and that was really, really difficult because people were really not helpful, the people I was doing the work with. And then no one spoke English, but they couldn't speak Spanish, but they couldn't also understand my Spanish, but I could understand their Portuguese, but they couldn't understand me. And that was really tricky because I was like, how come I can understand you and you're supposed to understand me, and how come you're not? And that was really challenging, but because also they got irritated because I didn't kind of like spoke their language. So yeah, I mean, there's always, but it's also this barrier of why are you doing a job that someone here could be doing as well. And that was also quite challenging. And again, I haven't experienced it in London, but I think it's purely because, as you said, there's so many cultures and people are used to, so it's not rare. And where we work, we are from all over the show, and you know, it's just what it is. It's common. But in rarer places, yeah, it does become, not so pleasant always.
Why do you do it?
why do you do it?
I think I said it, and I repeat it. I think as designers, anthropologists, whatever, user researcher, you are your experiences. You are better with your experiences. I just don't think you can be good at much if you're not exposed. I have worked with colleagues who have never left where they're from, and you see it in their work. It's not personal. It's not because I think they're boring. It's because you really see it on the kind of work they do. And it's really not that interesting. It's not, like, for instance, if you're approaching a design challenge and you never experience anything different, how can you go and think like you are your user? It's just really difficult. So I really believe in that, but also because I think deep down I do enjoy it.
But did you know that you were going to do it? Did you ever think to yourself, oh, I'm going to go to different countries and do design and do, and, you know?
I always wanted to go to different countries, yeah, since forever. I didn't know I was going to be a designer. That I didn't know because I studied anthropology, and I didn't know I would end up here today. But I always kind of had a north, yeah. So, yeah.
I wonder if age is also part of diversity for you, because it's not only cultures but also generations that might affect and reflect on the work. So, yeah, it's kind of the questions here about the millennia generation. So, can you say about, from your experience, if there is any?
Yeah, yeah. For instance, at Hyper Island, they all were super young. Not all of them, but most of them were really young. And in our first team, they have this thing called reflection, and you have to receive and give feedback. And people tell you honestly what they like that you do and what they don't like about what you do. And I had never had anything of the sort. And everybody in my team was like in their early 20s. And someone stood up to me and said, "You hurt my feelings." And I was like, "What?" And I was like, I have never been told that. Like, how come I hurt your feelings? And he was like 24. He's like, "Yes, your body language and something you said." And then the following person, because it's done in public, again told me, "Well, I think you disrespected me." And so on it went. There were 4 people giving me feedback, and 3 of them told me this in a room full of people. And it really caught me by surprise, and I really think it was a generational thing, that they felt really offended by my way of saying things, even if
More straightforward, right?
yeah, even if I didn't mean it, or even, and I really hurt their feelings. So
I think that's a very good point, because there is a very good exhibition regarding aging population in the design museum at the moment. So I was looking at the day, and then yes, I see myself that. That's why I asked you at the beginning, and I said that, do you think that these millennial people, the young people, is changing the way they perceive things? I think I don't know if this is experience or through design thinking and design practice, we're learning how to talk to people differently or approach projects in a different way, especially at this stage of our career, for example, when you have a younger designer with less experience. As you said, they haven't left their house, they haven't really seen something different from what they used to see every day on a bus or in the tube. So maybe that creates this kind of distance. Maybe it is the age that comes with the experience, maybe?
I think it's possible. I think it's experience. I think it's a little bit of arrogance. I also from my experience of studying with them, and now a little bit at work, but less so. A little bit of arrogance, a little bit of like, why would I bother? Like, what? Or a little bit of like, that's completely unnecessary. Even though I had been doing it for 13 years, they would say like, I don't think that's the way. Like, so I think it's a little bit of like this sense of, I don't know, it's not needed, or it's not, what for. But I mean, not everyone. And again, yeah, I definitely think experience, and I mean, I did experience design, so it was all about how you experience the world.
A couple of more questions. I have one. Anyone from? Yeah, you have.
Yeah. So you obviously talking about diversity in a team and how that can be really good for creativity. But do you think there's ever a point where there's a limit to that, where maybe there's 2 things that are so disparate from each other that they can't work together or something? Can there be a limit to diversity? Just the opposite question, I guess.
Okay, hold on. So you mean like that in the process of building upon, there are 2 things that cannot be built upon anymore?
Is that possible with that kind of thing?
I think, yeah, and it happens to us often that we're in a team and we really don't agree. We really are like seeing things completely differently, and we need to take a step. And again, at school more often than not, and people ended up crying and whatnot. At work, you don't have the luxury. You kind of have to answer the brief, even if it's not. So yes, it happens. But look, I think the point I was trying to make throughout the presentation is that in the exercise, even if you don't agree and even if it collides, in the exercise of building upon and expanding, you are being creative, because even if you don't agree, your own idea, you're expanding inevitably.
Yeah.
It's
Having the
just-
opposite idea forces you to
Yeah,
more creative.
and defend your point.
Yeah.
Create
Or
an
maybe
argument.
create an argument. I mean, imagine like if you come up with everything for yourself, which I did for years. It's only your viewpoint and it's only your angle, and so you have no one to challenge you, and it's dangerous. So I think definitely attention is important, and it's kind of the awareness that I talk about, is being aware of those tensions. And I think that you become a better designer by being aware of those tensions and not being scared of them as well.
How long have you been doing this?
I've been doing anthropology for the last 14 years and applied to design specifically some 8 years.
So, do you want to ask something else?
So, did you say 8 years you've been traveling?
No, I've been traveling for 14 years.
14 years?
Yeah.
Any other? One final, like, design it.
Yeah.
Okay, that is your current
Yeah.
home. Yeah. So, do you want to talk a bit more about it?
Yeah, of
and,
course.
what you do, how is the environment, what diversity means for design even?
Yeah, look, it's pretty amazing. So the global design companies, how many countries are we on, Josh? You will know the...
With 13 offices, around 13 countries, well, about 10, 11 countries.
Yeah, so, and is it like they started in
Denmark.
Denmark, and then the other biggest office is in Spain. And so we work with people literally from all over, from Spain to Northern Europe to Turkey to South America. And basically my role there is to lead teams, again, same story, different teams at different times. And they all multidisciplinary. So conventionally a team would be a user researcher, a visual designer, UX designer mostly, and another service designer, for instance, and myself, leading sort of the direction of the project by working quite collaboratively. And then I would say that that's sort of what we do. We just put together different teams, answer different briefs, and that's the structure. It's pretty flat as well. And then it's rare to find a team with 2 leads, for instance, or like, it's always like one of us kind of taking the lead on where the project should go, but working, I mean, it's very flat. Like I'm no one's boss. It's more like, well, I was just telling Josh, I just do meetings all day, which I'm not quite enjoying, but like, it is part of the trade. So yeah, and I would say what they really look at is quite a diverse background in people. So people who come from interesting places and have done different things, and also obviously who can think beyond and be very critical. Because as I explained, it's not about having this big, bright idea, no ego. Because for the kinds of briefs we get, they are very analytical. And so strategic thinking and things like long-term are highly valued. So I would say, if as advice for students, it'll be like, really, if you're really creative and really good and really talented, but you lack on the other, then maybe it'll be a good idea to get a balance.
Favorite place that you've been to, and the kind of project. And
Okay, then that will be the last one for tonight. I don't want to.
You mean favorite place I've been in my life for a holiday or for work?
As in, like,
This guy from Colombia, what do you expect he would say?
you went to work. Like, with design. The place that you've been to. What place that did you feel that you enjoyed the most? And project. What project as well?
Yeah, my favorite place in the world is in South Africa, and it's Cape Town. And I would have to say working there would be my favorite. And then the project was investigating different uses of mobile technology amongst very poor, bottom of the pyramid people in townships, which are like favelas in Cape Town, to be specific. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very
Awesome.
much for coming. I can keep you for another hour. I don't know if they will enjoy as much. I do. I do, but I'm sure that we will have definitely another chance to have you some
Awesome,
point
yes,
around.
of course.
I wanted Josh to say some things, but just you wanted to say something. You work in the team. You might be.
Yeah.
Yeah. You wanna come here maybe?
Yeah, yeah,
For
when
5
I'm
minutes,
here.
like,
He loves talking.
yeah, so please join us, and just maybe it would be good to have some another view from your side.
Yeah, of course.
Tell us what you do, and
Yeah, so I'm a service designer along with Marcela at Design It, obviously. Don't know what else you want to know about that, really.
so tell us what is your experience, what's your background, how you turn up working together, and how to find it. If you don't like it, pretend you do.
No, I really love being a designer, actually. So I started out doing a computer science with maths undergraduate degree, so, being very on the kind of logical side, really, picking apart problems, etc., etc. And so my my final year project was very much an HCI project, human computer interaction project, and that really got me thinking about, well, let's not just think about computers as things that do really cool algorithms, etc., etc., but actually, what is the purpose of them? Why did they exist? Why are we doing it? The user side of things. So then I went and did a master's in human-centered interactive technologies, so user-centered design, really focusing on why is it important, for people who use the things. So usability, UX, and then service design, although this wasn't quite existing at that time. Then I took a job basically at Design It straight away from there, and have loved it ever since, to be honest.
Do you want to ask something? Are you traveling at the same time?
I haven't done much travelling now. No, not at work anyway. I went to India on a project and a few other places, but no, I've mainly stayed in London, to be honest.
Okay. So
What kind of things did you have you like user experience wise or project wise? The kind of like object or design, can I say, have you brought out there for people to experience?
So in terms of, are you asking kind of what different types of design I've done?
Yeah.
Yeah, so mainly around, I guess, the UX and the more strategic side of things, so the service design. Again, going into a bit of the UI design, etc. Before that, I was actually doing a lot of front-end development, so really, on the other side of things, which I think is another important thing about, the collaboration with different people in the teams, because one of the other things we're doing at Design It is working with our parent company Wipro Digital and their parent Wipro Technologies. So not just having, a load of different designers, because that's not the only important thing, but actually taking, working in a team which has designers and developers and very large strategic thinkers down to very detailed orientated visual designers and the developers who can actually make this happen. Working in a team that has all of that is what's actually making it possible to move forwards, because you can't just design something and hope for the best, because you end up just going in an art gallery, which is a fantastic thing, but you actually need the ability to make it happen. And so a shift that's happening in the industry, and this is why the big companies are buying these design companies, and this is why Marcela was looking at doing her dissertation on that, was that the reason these big companies are buying the design is because you can design stuff, but you also need to be able to then build it. And if you have them as two separate companies or two separate teams building these things and designing it, it doesn't work, because you throw it over the fence, you end up not really understanding what's going on, there's crosswires, miscommunication. But by having those teams together, and actually becoming one team, that's where you really understand what's going on. So, a designer will come up with a really cool idea, and then the developer will go, hold on a second, that's going to take like 3 months to develop, but if you change this tiny little thing, which won't change the experience at all, it's now, 3 days. And it is that kind of difference of development that will turn it from a design that, is printed in a really nice brand book and looks great, and, clients pay, however much for, and everyone's happy, but they didn't get anything out of it, versus actually, working with people who can make this. That is actually what will allow you to make things that will actually change the world.
Is there like an example of a prototype?
Yeah, so
It's failed or didn't come across?
an example that didn't work was your question?
Any example. They don't have to say about the ones that they are in progress.
That hasn't worked or anything. Is there? Could you describe?
I can't think of one off the top of my head that I've experienced. Not.
But definitely there will be some like
Oh.
experiments, like development process.
Yeah.
And it's like some ideas maybe that come in, I suppose, like
Yeah.
as briefs that either you work a bit on that and then you say you don't really want to take it further or wherever.
No, exactly. So it's not necessarily that the project doesn't go right, but it's an idea that you then drop, and that's where the kind of agile and lean stuff comes in. So you will, rather than kind of traditional waterfall style way of doing things, which is do huge amounts of development, design, and spend months and months designing this thing, and then finding out only later that it doesn't work. You do this user research up front. You go ahead and think about the strategy of it, doing service design, going, okay, is this going to make sense? Go talking to the users. Do you like this idea? This is a sketch currently, and so. Kind of the way in which we do this means that we don't end up with too many things not going right, because we drop the things that don't go right and then kind of shift to things that will work, and so we keep iterating on that. So I'd say you'll always end up with something that works if you keep iterating. That's kind of the way I go with it. So,
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Last one.
Are you two always together?
Not always, no.
No.
So the way in which Design It works is that we're not always just one team. It's we have 45 people now in our London office, and so we'll have a lead and a couple of people here, and then we'll have another project, and so this lead will take over another couple of people. So we'll always mix. It's actually Marcela's first project was on a team with me. That
Yeah.
was the one she was mentioning. So it's
Yeah.
definitely fun.
I said she must be excited.
Oh, she's excited. Yeah.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, Marcela. Thanks for the presentation.
Awesome.
Just for the input. It was absolutely great. Thanks a
You
lot.
guys enjoy it. Thank you.
And hopefully we'll have you again around soon.
Hopefully. Thank you.